The power of the review in the palm of my hand. So Spider-Man 2 tells the story of Peter Parker beginning to struggle with his balance of his life and his duties as Spider-Man while Dr. Octopus begins to prey upon New York City. Welcome back everybody to the Spider-Man review series. I'm going over the Raimi trilogy as well as the two amazing Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield previous to the release of Spider-Man No Way Home next week. It's the first time I've been able to talk about these movies on this channel, and especially talking about these Raimi movies. These are movies that I'm very passionate about and I've always loved, so I'm excited to finally be able to talk about them. I reviewed the original movie from 2002 2 days ago, so if you want to check out that full review, pause this one, go check out that one, catch yourself up, and then press the play button on this one, Spider-Man 2, which as of right now is my favorite Spider-Man movie and one of my favorite comic book films of all time. This was a movie that had a lot to prove. It was a movie that had a lot of hype and a lot of expectations on its shoulders, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a movie that exceeded all of those expectations and still is very relevant and still holds up very well today, much like I believe most of the original film does, but even more so here. The first film really blew the lid off as far as the possibilities for comic book films in 2002. And speaking for me personally, I had just left Ohio, which was my home my entire childhood, moved to Georgia. I was 14 years old, and this was the very first movie that I got a chance to see in my new home. And I was lonely, I was fish out of water, I was confused about life, and all of that like you normally are when you're 14 years old. But walking into the movie theaters to see Spider-Man 2, I still have very fond memories of just feeling at home for the first time after being in a new place and feeling like things were going to be okay, and things that don't really necessarily are resonant in the movie itself, but just the experience of seeing an incredible sequel to a movie that I already loved and having my expectations blown and being able to just experience that great movie theater magic in a new place, just like I used to in my original home. That's something I'll always remember this movie for. I'll also remember it for the pretty damn awesome, for the time, movie tie-in video game that came with this. This was the first video game that really let you actually web swing around New York. You know, now you kind of take that for granted with the two Sony PlayStation Spider-Man games, but back in the day, that was like a huge leg up, because all the other Spider-Man movies, you would just shoot into the midair and just go across buildings like this, attaching to fucking clouds. But this was the first one that you actually got swinging physics and you felt like you were swinging around New York. So many times I would just go around, not doing shit, just web swinging. And that's another thing that I will always remember this movie for, is that awesome movie video game tie-in, something that you don't really see anymore when you used to get them for every major blockbuster. But talking about this movie specifically now, the good, the positives, the things that I love regarding Spider-Man 2, like I said with the first film, Spider-Man, especially this trilogy, was always a very emotional movie series. It was always a very emotional comic book adaptation, a comic book character. And I think this itself, the second movie, is one of, if not the most emotional superhero comic book film ever made. There's so many things that are wearing down on Peter Parker and Spider-Man as a character that you experience all throughout this movie, to where everything in life is coming down on him at once. He's got a girl that he loves that he can't be with or won't be with for her own safety, and she's constantly tugging at him. He's got this strained friendship with a guy who's basically his brother regarding this secret that he was at least involved with his father's death and can't find a way to communicate to the truth to his friend. You have all the responsibilities of just regular day life with having a job, being able to make rent, being able to make it to class on time and actually study and get an A, and all the things that everybody without superpowers struggles to balance with. And then, of course, yes, you have all these criminals, all these crimes, and all these, disturbances throughout New York City that invade all of those things that are pulling at his attention. And he always takes the responsible route and puts everything in his life on the line and on the back burner in order to save people, in order to protect New York City. And even more prevalent whenever Doc Ock finally does kind of unleash onto New York City and he's facing potentially the greatest villain that he'll ever face. And so many times throughout this movie where they pause and they really make you feel the weight that is on Peter Parker's shoulders. Very few comic book movies have ever attempted, let alone succeeded on this level at really making you understand the realism of the weight of having that type of responsibility, that type of life. You know, there's so many times where it just seems like it's awesome to be a superhero. Like, fuck Batman, I'm rich as shit. I got women all around me all the time. I can go fly around, do whatever the hell I want. That'd be awesome, right? And then you get to Spider-Man, and it's like, this sucks. This life sucks. And so many moments in the film really just make you kind of bathe in that. You know, there's not so much Spider-Man action in this movie, at least compared to the first film and the third film. This is very much about Peter Parker and who he is and how he is growing as a hero or sliding backward as a hero. And it all kind of comes to a culmination in that scene where he's having this vision talking to Uncle Ben in his car. And Uncle Ben's like, you know, take my hand, son, become Spider-Man, remain Spider-Man. That with great power comes great responsibility. And with tears in his eyes, he tells his uncle, no, like, I'm not gonna do it. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And that's just such a powerful scene. There's such a powerful moment for that character, like so many other moments in this film that just really hammer home the weight and the emotion that comes along with a life like this. And pretty much every single story arc that began in the 2002 movie either comes to a nice conclusion here or comes to a nice midpoint. It's followed through perfectly, whether you're talking about the relationship between Peter Parker and Mary Jane and that kind of strained love that they both have and trying to find a place for each other in their lives that they want so desperately but just can't seem to make work. Even between Harry Osborn and Peter Parker, to where they have this friendship that's growing a little bit more antagonistic, a little bit more strained because of this whole secret regarding Norman Osborn. And even things like Aunt May. Like, Aunt May in this trilogy, to me, is the only version of Aunt May that really feels significant and feels like it's a big piece of the Peter Parker storyline. Not shitting on what they've done with the other two trilogies. I will eventually talk about the next one, and I've given my thoughts on Homecoming, but this Aunt May and this relationship between Peter and May is really like his heartbeat. It's the one that kind of grounds him to reality. It's the tether that always pulls him back from the darkness. No matter what is going on, no matter how bad things get, no matter how crumbled his life seems, all it ever takes is one conversation with May to put everything back into perspective, and it always brings him back to the light. And, you know, the whole scene where he finally admits to her that he is inadvertently the reason why Uncle Ben is killed, and tells her the whole story, and she won't even speak to him. And then the very follow-up scene after that where she tells him, like, look, it's not you, it's his fault. Like, don't ever put that burden on yourself. And although they kind of dropped the ball with following this up in the third film, it really does feel like she knows that he's Spider-Man, because there's a whole scene where she's telling him, after forgiving him and after letting him know, like, this is not your burden, this is not your cross to bear, telling him almost directly to his face, like, everybody needs Spider-Man. This little boy that's helping me move, he needs Spider-Man. I need Spider-Man. You need Spider-Man. And I always love when it comes to that point in the movie, because after all of the darkness that we've gone through, after all of the life-altering events, all of these things that are just crumbling Peter Parker down to his knees, all it takes is that one conversation with Aunt May, and then he's back on the rooftops. I'm back, baby! And so many things are followed up perfectly like a sequel should regarding these characters. And then you have the new character, the new villain here, with Alfred Molina playing Dr. Otto Octavius, and he is brilliant. To me, he's the best Spider-Man villain, and probably always will be. As much as I love what Willem Dafoe does with Green Goblin, I think that Otto Octavius is a little bit more grounded, not quite as scenery-chewing, and the way that him as a comic book villain is realized through practical and digital effects, I think is brilliant. I mean, having those practical arms always with him, having him have this attitude that's very menacing, but also not necessarily like maniacal, not mustache twirling. He seems like a guy who is very in the right mind and has something that he wants to do that is kind of for the good of mankind. He's just going about it the wrong way. I like those types of villains the best, the ones that really don't feel like they're the villain in their own story. Not somebody that knows they're doing all this evil. It's somebody that thinks that they're going to commit a little evil for the greater good, And I think that he's brilliant written as a character like that. And I think Alfred Molina plays him perfectly. He's charming, he's endearing. The whole relationship that he gets in the beginning where he's really kind of being almost like a father-like mentor, similar to how Norman Osborn was to Peter Parker in the first act of the film, and then eventually succumbs to the influence of these arms just to kind of redeem himself again in the third act. I think that he is a perfectly utilized villain. And all of these sequences regarding Doc Ock and Spider-Man, I think, are all awesome. I mean, you want to talk about action sequences and memorable sequences, that whole train fight paired with the train rescue where he's shooting his webs and holding it and crushing himself against the train, that is still top 5 greatest scenes in any comic book film ever. I mean, the action, the way that it's shot, the way that the special effects are so perfectly blended in, all of the quick little movements where he's going between trains and he's getting knocked off and having to slide around on a door on the streets and everything regarding that sequence. That's like a 10-minute stretch. That's just absolute comic book movie magic. And one of the other most memorable and most badass sequences in any of the Spider-Man films is that very like Evil Dead horror style Sam Raimi scene to where Doc Ock is first kind of brought to life, where he's been knocked out by this whole accident and all these doctors are in this little enclosed room getting ready to cut these arms off, and the arms come to life and start fucking up everybody while Dr. Octopus is kind of unconscious. And the way that they edit and shoot this scene together, where you get POV shots of the arms, you get all these different doctors grabbing chainsaws, getting thrown across the room. It's bloodless, there's no gore, but it feels like it's a gory scene. It feels like everybody just got massacred in this room while this dude was just asleep. And it's one of the most awesome setups, one of the most awesome transition scenes from character to villain. Now, a story direction in this movie that it turned out to be a lot more controversial than I ever realized that it was, because I've heard more and more people say they never really were on board with this direction, is the whole thing about Peter kind of psychosomatically losing his powers throughout the movie. The more that he is torn between two different lives, the more that his powers start to fade. And for me, I'm somebody that really buys into that. I'm somebody that really understands story-wise what they were going for. Whether or not mentally that is how it works or not, we're talking about superhero movies here. So the fact that you have this guy that is trying so hard to do both and not really put his foot planted firmly in either side, his body kind of giving out and choosing for him to alleviate some of that stress, is something that I think it really has a nice emotional tie to the themes that they're going for in here. And there's so many moments to where he really is trying his best to continue to give little barely amounts of anything to all elements of his life, and hoping that that's just going to let him slide through it. And when there's comes moments where he's given up Spider-Man altogether because he wants to do his regular life, he wants to be Peter Parker, and then there's this gigantic inferno, and he goes in and risks his life, a lower powered version at least of himself, to save this little girl, just to find out in the moment where he feels like he's done something good that somebody was trapped up on the 4th floor and still died. And it just, the realization on Tobey Maguire's face and his performance in this movie, where he realizes that he's not going to be able to be half hero. He's either got to be full in or full out, or he's going to die, or everybody else is going to die that needs him. I think it's really powerful stuff, and I think it really it hammers home so many emotions in this movie that I've already kind of expressed, to where it feels like something that you don't really see a superhero go through very often, that he's actually losing himself as a hero in many ways. Now, I honestly don't have any negatives with this movie, but I do have 2 things that I am a little bit mixed on. One thing is more a logic issue, a plot convenience in this movie that has never really made sense, and I don't really hear it get addressed too often, except for once or twice somebody will bring it up and I'm like, yes, exactly, but we forgive it, right? Doc Ock. When you have Doc Ock and he is full-on villain, clearly his plot is he wants to reassemble all of his equipment and recreate his experiment, his fusion experiment from the first act of the movie. And so you see him going and robbing banks and committing crimes, trying to gather funds to replenish all of his equipment, and then eventually going to Harry Osborn directly to get this little tritium element that he needs to create this fusion reaction. And so he has to kind of like extort James Franco in order to get this element, and has to eventually go and hunt down Peter Parker to find Spider-Man, to deliver Spider-Man to Harry Osborn in order to get this tritium. And all throughout the movie, although, like I said, it's a nitpick and it's something that I easily forgive and just go along the ride with, I always wonder why the hell Doc Ock doesn't just go steal all the shit that he needs. Like, you can go into a bank, you can rip open this gigantic high security vault, take all this money, endure shootouts, climb these huge skyscrapers, which is all for just the sake of having these awesome scenes, and I understand that. Why would you not just go to the manufacturers that's about to give you all this shit and just take all the shit that you need for your experiment? Why not go to Harry Osborn and literally just be like, motherfucker, I will drop you now. Give me the tritium. Where is it at? Even after he makes the deal, go back later on and just take the shit. It's right there in his his penthouse. So it's a small little thing that most people probably never realize and probably never even think about. And even after me saying it, people could watch this movie 100 times and not even care about it. And I'm certainly in that camp. I forgive it and I move on. But it's always something that has never really made a whole lot of sense to me. And the other thing, which is also a bit of a writing thing, a bit of a plot convenience because we need certain things to happen, but it is frustrating because it seems so purposeful and it seems like a total script logic here that's just, we're making it make sense because we need it to. There's so many moments in this movie where Peter Parker withholds information that just frustrates the shit out of me because it just doesn't make any sense. Like, he has this whole habit where he can't make it to this play on time, and MJ's giving him shit the entire movie because he's just not there for her and he's more and more distant, which is the one time in this trilogy that I kind of can sympathize with her being a bit of a bitch. But he has this whole thing where he's finally going to make it to this play, and this is it. This is the time. This is the last straw for MJ. And what happens? A fucking car that's getting chased by the cops runs his scooter over, decimates it to pieces, and almost kills him because people don't realize he's Spider-Man. And he doesn't tell her that. He just says, oh, you know, there was a disturbance and this and that. And then he drags his busted ass scooter all the way home. And it's like, dude, tell her you almost got fucking killed. Look at the scooter, MJ. I literally was almost that scooter. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to your fucking play, but I'm okay though. And then the other big one is later on, you know, all this build up to him and Harry finally having that revelation that he is Spider-Man and that he was inadvertently he was at least involved with the death of his father. That's about the most you could say about his guilt to that situation. And you get to the end, and when he's unmasked and he's like, Peter, it's you. You killed my father.
Peter, you killed my father.
There are bigger things happening here than me and you.
Why not just say your father is a fucking Green Goblin? Your father was a murderer. Your father killed himself because he was trying to kill me. Like, he tries to say that in the third movie months later when it's way too fucking late and he's already taken the psycho serum. But why not in that moment? Why not he just let the truth out? I understand he needs to get to MJ, but shit, it took just as long to say that as it did that fucking movie line about there's bigger things going on here. Bitch, your dad was psycho. He was the Green Goblin. You need more evidence than that? Yeah, he almost blew you and your girlfriend off that fucking balcony a couple years ago. Remember that shit? So again, like, I'm getting really animated about it because it's so funny to me and it's such a script thing where it's written to not be stupid, but it is. But I adore this movie. I absolutely love this movie. This is one of my favorites of all time. And even those two tiny little things that I always notice, they don't really bother me. Just, I have to notate it since I'm talking about the movie. So this is a damn near perfect comic book film to me. It's one of the greatest sequels of all time, one of the greatest comic book films of all time, and it is my favorite Spider-Man movie, at least until No Way Home comes out. You know, gotta leave that potential that maybe it might overtake this one, but it's got some big ass shoes to fill if it does. So if you're a Spider-Man fan, if you love the first film, absolutely check out this sequel that to me is even better than the original, and absolutely add it to your collection. Go out and buy it. So what do you guys think of Spider-Man 2? Do you think that this is one of the best sequels of all time? Do you actually think this is a weaker installment in this franchise than some of the previous movies? What are all of your thoughts? Let me know down below, guys. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future, like the Spider-Man 3 review, the 2 Amazing Spider-Man reviews, all of my coverage regarding Spider-Man No Way Home, or anything else Marvel in the future, because there's going to be plenty of it. Please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of that. Thank you guys for watching as always, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.